Good evening. Tonight the story begins in the sweltering, ash-filled world of someone who didn't just shape metal, they shaped their age. The blacksmith. Many might picture them as glowing cinematic silhouettes, swinging hammers in slow motion, sparks floating like fireflies. But let's be honest, the truth was far less poetic. Life at the forge was grimy, grueling, and blister-filled. In most cases it was downright miserable. Before we fully settle in, maybe consider gently tapping the like button, only if this calm space brings comfort. Feel free to share where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always a quiet joy to know where gentle ears are tuning in from. Now let's dim the lights, let the soft hum of a fan fill the silence, and wander together into the soot-covered rhythms of a life forged in fire. They were born into a world of anvils and smoke, not crowns or land or gilded titles. Just an inherited forge, iron-shaped calluses, and the unmistakable scent of roasted metal soaked into swaddling cloth. As soon as tiny feet could walk without stumbling into flames, expectations arrived. By 6, they were given a title, apprentice, which truly meant unpaid helper with soot-stained cheeks and no complaints allowed. Their toys? Tongs. Their playground? A dirt-covered floor beside a heat so fierce it could singe lashes in seconds. While other children chased hens or skimmed stones over streams, they learned to dodge molten iron and guess temperatures by touch. Favourite pastimes included, hold the hammer until your arms go numb, and don't cry if the nail bends again. The father, the master of the forge, loomed large, all muscle and silence, his words limited to heavy sighs and the eternal instruction, harder. His hands were more bark than skin, his scowl carved from decades of tax collectors and rising smoke. From him they learned everything, how to coax shape from metal, how to feed the fire, and how to keep silent when a noble sneered at imperfect work. No questions were asked, only watched and absorbed. Curiosity earned thrown horseshoes and week-long silences. Holidays? A charming myth. The fire never rested, and neither did they. There was always something cracked, blunted, or broken that needed mending. In time they understood, spare moments weren't truly rest. They were simply interludes between tasks. This wasn't just a trade. It was a lesson in enduring heat, in standing through exhaustion, in drifting off mid-strike. By 10 they already smelled like a forge, spoke like a sailor, and had arms strong enough to carry water heavier than the family dog, assuming it hadn't long since run from the constant clanging. This was life now. The legacy passed from one calloused hand to the next. A legacy shaped in smoke, sweat, and 70 slow years of aching joints. Out in the fields, other village children might be seen tossing sticks or learning the art of milking goats. Even though they often carried the scent of curdled cheese and barnyard air, there was still envy toward them. They had a chance, perhaps, to become farmers or shepherds. Modest paths, yes, but ones that didn't come with glowing metal, or burns that arrived without warning. Meanwhile, these young apprentices spent their days shaping nails, one, by hand. Thousands of them, bent, reheated, twisted, and straightened again, until each one could hold together some noble's chicken coop. On fortunate days, their father allowed them to swing the hammer alone, usually after reminding them of everything they'd done incorrectly. The phrase, "I'm tired," held no meaning in this place. Fatigue was considered weakness. Burnout was for candles, not blacksmiths. They were expected to keep hammering, keep sweating, and at the very least to keep any tears hidden. Because in the eyes of the man who was both master and father, they were no longer just a child. They were in training, and the training had no end. The forge wasn't merely a workspace, it became the whole world. It shaped their muscles, overtook their senses, and rewired their thoughts. By adolescence, the forge no longer felt like a room. It became a living creature, smoky, hot, moody, demanding. They came to know its sounds by instinct. The wheeze of the bellows, the hiss of iron in water, the rhythmic clash of metal striking metal, all part of a brutal kind of symphony. Eventually the heat stopped feeling harsh, not because it softened, but because they accepted it, like rain or gravity. Their skin darkened from soot, not sun. Their clothing, always the same, scorched tunic, stiff apron, carried the scent of burnt wool, grease, and a kind of quiet resignation. They didn't truly own much, except the forge itself. Not by title, their father still ruled, but in truth the forge owned them. Their arms had grown thick, though not in the glorious fashion of a knight poised to raise a gleaming sword. No, theirs looked more like limbs shaped by constant collisions with anvils. Their back, bent, worn, a quiet tragedy, was moulded by long hours of lifting iron and leaning endlessly over the forge. Knees creaked every time they crouched, and their shoulders gave a familiar pop with each hammer swing, a sound that had become part of their daily rhythm. And then there were the hands. What once were fingers had transformed into something tougher, blistered claws, blackened with soot, edges cracked and scarred. No matter how many times they scrubbed, the grime lingered like memory. The Nile itself couldn't rinse it away. Cuts were an everyday companion. Burns arrived like clockwork. Fingernails, well, half were missing or forever dark. When someone handed them bread, they held it as if it were a baby hedgehog made of glass, every knuckle aching as though cursed. Recovery didn't exist. A pulled muscle meant carrying on. A twisted wrist meant switching sides. The forge didn't pause for anyone's pain. Iron waits for no one. And sleep? With a body so used to movement and strain, one might expect it to collapse into slumber. But no. The aching made rest nearly impossible. Muscles throbbed. Ears still rang with the echo of clanging steel. Arms twitched with the memory of a hammer long set down. They dreamed of sparks and swinging, haunted by motion. Even their pain had its own pain. And their father? He offered only a nod and the words, "Good, you're learning." Somehow he was right. They weren't withering from the strain. They were being forged, just like the iron, through pressure, repetition, and flame. But by the time adulthood arrived, the body felt like it had already endured 2 lifetimes, and worn out halfway through both. And that was only the beginning. For others, smoke was a nuisance. For them, it was a co-worker, not a friendly one either. Each breath carried the flavours of ash, scorched metal, oil, regret. If they could see more than 6 feet ahead, it meant someone had forgotten to relight the fire. The forge had no chimney, just a hole in the roof that welcomed more smoke than it let out. There were no windows, only blackened walls, only coughing, wind and sting in the eyes. Their lungs had long since entered a toxic romance with smoke. First it stung, then it irritated. One day it simply became normal. And somehow that rag they tied around their face always managed to smell worse than the smoke it was meant to block. The moment they removed it, breathing became just a bit more difficult. But at least they weren't choking on their own sweat. Of course, long-term damage was expected. Asthma, soot-filled lungs, and the quiet march toward an early grave. All just part of the trade. But they didn't dwell on the future. Their thoughts remained on the crooked gate hinge, hoping to fix it before their father spotted the flaw. In the world of a medieval blacksmith, air wasn't a blessing. It was simply one more weight to carry. They didn't inhale to live. They inhaled to keep striking. By now they'd formed an oddly personal relationship with their tools, one grounded in pain, duty, and mild mutual contempt. The hammer, for instance, was no longer just a tool. It was part of the arm, an extension forged from repetition and habit. They had named it, cursed it, swung it so often that their shoulder clicked like a haunted maraca each time it rose. Without it, they were just another sweaty figure in a haze of ash. With it, they were something more. A smith, albeit one who bled often. The tongs, however, were less forgiving. Always clumsy, often overheated, and reliably pinching at the worst possible moments. They had burned their fingertips more times than they had successfully grasped iron. The grip slipped, the metal fell, they shouted, and their father simply growled, "Hold it like you mean it." They had thought about throwing the tongs into the fire, just to make a point. Their chisel, once sharp. Now it mostly resembled a worn suggestion of a blade, dulled from years of splitting, scraping, and occasionally breaking open stubborn doors. The workbench, scattered with files, punches, rivet sets, looked more like something found in a torture chamber than a workspace. And truth be told, it felt like one too. They'd been poked, jabbed, crushed, and sliced by almost everything they owned. Even their fingers now flinched at the mere sight of something new. As for the apron, it was meant to shield them. And in a way it did. If by shield, one meant catching flying hot shards and holding them lovingly against the chest. Stiff, scorched, stiffened by winter, it wrapped around them like a burnt embrace. And yet they cared for every piece, oiled them, sharpened them, laid them out each night in quiet reverence, because without those tools there was no work. And without work, no coin, no food. Tools were life, but they were also the enemies that whispered, "We'll keep you alive, just enough to break you." And still they answered, "Pass the hammer." They were expected to feel grateful when repairing a rusty bucket at dusk, all for half a loaf of dry, crumbling bread. Payment was rarely consistent, Sometimes it came in coins, other times in produce, and occasionally in vague promises that disappeared by the next market day. One man once paid with a dead chicken. Supposedly good for soup. It wasn't. And they were always the one people turned to, even for problems that clearly weren't theirs. A bent hinge caused by someone sitting too hard on a gate. They fixed it. A dagger snapped in a drunken brawl. Also theirs to mend. Some strange hunk of metal no one could identify, but everyone insisted must be repaired. Still them. Yet when the village offered praise, it never went their way. The knight earned cheers, the priest earned reverence, and the miller, especially the one with the plumpest goat, earned admiration. But the blacksmith? They were just part of the background, useful, reliable, not fully seen. But here's the quiet truth. They knew that without their work the village wouldn't make it a week. Fields would stall, roofs would sag, horses would limp. They might not be celebrated, but their hands kept the entire world from falling apart. One might assume peace would bring relief. No raiders, no nobles bellowing for new swords by dusk. But for them, peace spelled trouble. For while they could make ploughs and hinges, the real coin came from war. When armies clashed, they were overwhelmed, with orders for weapons, armour, arrowheads, horseshoes worn thin by panicked charges. The forge roared, coins clinked, bellies were full, even debts at the alehouse shrank. But when peace returned, so did silence. Truces were declared. Knights stopped marching. Orders vanished. Suddenly they were sharpening sickles in exchange for 3 onions. They still crafted pots, cauldrons, door handles, but profit was scarce. Everyone expected miracles, yet paid like they were tipping a stable boy. They had to argue for fair pay, like a peddler hawking wares at the market. And heaven forbid they raise prices. People looked at them as if they'd cursed someone's cow. And quietly they missed the chaos, not the bloodshed but the flow, the purpose. Once, knights queued outside their forge with dented shields and jingling coin purses. Now they repaired keys for locks no one used, patched pots that should have been discarded, and restored tools better suited for museums. Peace for others brought comfort. For them, it brought hunger. And though they'd never say it aloud, a part of them whispered, a small skirmish wouldn't hurt, just a brief dispute, maybe near the border. Because in their world, broken swords meant supper. Isn't lukewarm and smoky, their apprentice comes rushing in, the friar has fallen ill, and the horse needs shoeing. Of course it does. Because in this village, being the blacksmith means being everyone's final call. The forge is ever needy. Fires won't stoke themselves, tools corrode when left alone, the anvil shifts under summer heat, and the bellows begin to crack as soon as winter sets in. Everything is either breaking or preparing to. Even holy days can't slow it down. Sundays are supposed to bring rest, but should an ox cart snap on its way to market, they're suddenly standing there, half asleep in a soot-streaked apron, silently praying the priest doesn't catch them working on the Lord's Day. There is no to-do list, because a to-do list implies there's an end. And in their trade, there isn't one. It's a loop. Work, mend, repeat, until the hammer slips for good, or the body simply refuses to rise. Strangely though, part of them cherishes it. One might imagine that spending a day pounding at blazing hot iron would at least promise a solid meal and some well-earned sleep. But in the world of a blacksmith, those are privileges, not certainties, like clear water or a civil customer. Let's talk food first. They labour from dawn till nightfall, burning energy like a runaway horse. And what awaits? A coarse chunk of bread, a bowl of cold pottage, maybe yesterday's turnip, maybe not. On special days, which are rare, a sliver of salted pork. They eat upright, one hand gripping tongs, the other guarding their food from ash that drifts like snow. Meals are wordless, interrupted often. If a neighbour knocks mid-bite with a stuck latch, that stew's going cold. Eating isn't for pleasure, it's for fuel. Hammer in, fuel out. And sleep? That's something else entirely. When they finally crawl onto the straw sack they call a bed, lumpy, flat, possibly crawling, their hands pulse, their spine groans, and the forge's music still rings in their ears. The blanket smells of scorched wool, spoiled ale, and lingering regret. Just as their eyes begin to shut, the brain stirs. That one unfinished order. That strange hinge. That payment still missing for the wagon wheel fixed 3 weeks ago. Sleep becomes a negotiation. They toss, they turn. They calculate how long repairs can be delayed before someone bangs on the door at first light. Then comes the midnight knock. A tossed shoe, a broken door, or a noble's blade in desperate need before dawn's hunt, because clearly they don't need rest. So they live on fragments. Bites stolen between jobs, sleep in broken intervals. Everything else, food, sleep, peace, is just a pause between hammer swings. Once their hands were soft, long ago. Now they are hardened tools, cracked, thick, unfeeling, unless pain reminds them they're still human. Pain had become such a regular companion that they barely noticed it anymore. Each time their hands moved, joints popped like old floorboards. Their knuckles bore the look of someone who'd argued with a hammer and lost. Their palms, an uneven map of blisters. Old, fresh, and layered like rings in the trunk of a tree. Curious what season it is? Count the blisters. If there are more than 5, it's summer again. They'd lost fingernails more than once. Some had fallen off cleanly, others more stubborn. Once their thumb turned a deep black after a nasty crush. But work didn't pause. They simply changed hands and groaned a bit more than usual. Cuts were a weekly event. Sometimes it was a jagged edge that caught skin. Other times a tool bit back. Every so often the iron itself turned hostile. Without fail, something drew blood. They wrapped it tight in cloth, muttered something beneath their breath, and carried on. The burns, though, those were worse. Some were minor, like whispered reminders that iron never forgives mistakes. Others hissed, bubbled, and left permanent messages etched across their skin. At this point, they'd branded themselves more often than most farmers marked their cattle. But they no longer felt frustration about it, only familiarity. Their grip strength? That had improved. They could snap walnuts like they were made of air. Dexterity, though, that was gone. Fingers trembled when cold. They dropped tools. At 30, their hands resembled those of a 70-year-old knight who'd survived 3 wars and now gambled for soup in a corner tavern. Still, those same hands kept them alive. They forged blades, repaired hinges, and held the hammer that preserved their reputation. The ache was constant, but they still functioned. Because in this trade, what mattered wasn't how broken they felt, only that they could still swing. Now let's be honest. They didn't smell good. In fact, cleanliness hadn't visited since they were 5, the day they became their father's apprentice. From that moment, their scent turned into a blend of burnt bacon, ashtray, and unspoken resignation. The forge burned all day. So did they. Smoke clung to everything. Clothes, hair, even sweat. It wasn't normal perspiration anymore. It smelled like someone had roasted meat and forgotten to put it away. Sure, a bath could help, in theory. But water was cold. Time was scarce. Soot found them before the sun did. Their tunic, burnt, apron, stiff, last cleaned, a festival ago. And even then, someone spilled ale on it before noon. Perfume, pointless. It vanished in 10 minutes. Flowers wilted near them. Bread aged faster. Cats hissed. People noticed. When they entered a tavern, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. The innkeeper seated them near the window. Not in kindness, but self-defense. No one wanted to sit beside a walking chimney. Still, they accepted it. Better to be noticed than invisible. They were known. People whispered, "That's the blacksmith," with equal parts respect, and wrinkled noses. They may not be the most charming figure in the village, but there's no mistaking them, because no one else smells quite so vividly. Carrying the scent of smoke meant they'd laboured. The odour of iron told others they'd crafted. And when someone wore the unmistakable perfume of sweat-soaked leather, coated in ash and quiet disappointment, that just meant they were a seasoned professional. This life wasn't something they pursued, it found them, delivered through the hardened palms of their father, and the iron-bound duty passed along like an heirloom, slightly rusted but never broken. And now they were passing it onward. Their son didn't spend his days swinging wooden swords or vanishing into the meadows. Instead, he hauled coal, pumped the bellows, and held tongs steady as the sparks danced around him. "Don't flinch," they would murmur, and the boy, maybe just 7, would already carry the scent of scorched iron and wet cloth. There was a trace of guilt, not deep, but present. Because this wasn't cruelty, it was preparation. It was the only path forward. The boy would watch them wield the hammer, eyes wide, equal parts admiration and unease. They recognized that stare. It was the same one they'd once given their own father, back when he looked like a mountain, not a man. Now the truth had become clear. He hadn't been carved from stone. He was made of exhaustion and duty. So the lessons continued, how to read the heat by colour, how to strike with rhythm, not rage, how to listen for what the metal whispered. They shouted at times, mostly from habit. That's not hot enough. Hold it right. Don't cry, oh, it's only a burn. And yet they tried to ease the harshness when they could. A tale by the forge, a scrap of dried fruit when times allowed. But kindness had little space in the forge. There was always more to do. Soon his hands would blister like theirs. His back would ache before his voice deepened. He'd learn to ignore the ringing in his ears and rise before sunrise without being called. His clothes would shrink on him, but the burns would linger. And when they finally couldn't lift the hammer, it would be the boy's turn. Some might call it unfair, that the cycle continued unbroken. But that's how it had always been. Soot, steel, and survival, carried across generations. What they handed down wasn't just a skill, it was a legacy, a fire that refused to go out. They didn't raise their son to repeat the pain out of cruelty, but because someone had to keep the embers alive. After decades beside the flame, iron in hand and breath short of clean air, their body finally faltered. Knees creaked like shutters in a gale. Their spine resisted every straightening. Fingers that once bent steel now quivered when lifting a cup. The forge still burned, but their arms no longer answered. Each day the hammer grew heavier, almost as if it understood it would soon fall from their grasp. There was no final blaze, no grand send-off, just a slowing. They sat more, worked less. Their son asked questions now, and they sometimes struggled to reply. The villagers began turning to him instead. They still offered a nod in passing, but it was the younger hands they trusted now. The boy who bore fresh burns and shoulders learning the weight of the craft. And quietly they felt proud. They had never been wealthy, never owned grand books or land or robes stitched with gold. But they had mattered. They kept weapons sharp, wheels moving, doors swinging, farms thriving. The world rarely offered thanks, but it moved because of them. Most blacksmiths never saw the age of 50. The toll accumulated quietly, lungs darkened by smoke, joints worn down like blades on a whetstone, and hearts tired from a lifetime spent battling heat and labour. But even when their hands went still, their legacy endured. The nails in chapel doors, the blades resting at noblemen's sides, the hooves wrapped in fresh iron, each bore the quiet imprint of their craft. They didn't carry titles. They didn't seek honours. What they left behind were tools, calluses, and sons raised beside the fire, gripping the same hammers. In their world, that was enough. Perhaps their resting place was modest, a plain grave, no gilded plaque, no carved statue, just a name etched in wood. Yet long after they were gone, the sound of steel striking steel echoed through the village. That was their voice, still at work. They weren't knights, no banners flew for them, no polished armour bore their crest. But they had forged that armour. They hadn't tilled the fields, but they shaped the ploughs that did. They didn't knead the bread, but they crafted the oven doors. They didn't build castles, yet every hinge, bracket, and nail inside them passed through their fire. They were blacksmiths, and in that age, that meant everything. While lords bickered and kings traded crowns, the blacksmith stayed beside the anvil, shaping history in quiet, unseen increments. 1,000 small items, hooks, clasps, nails, reins, rarely admired, always essential. Their lives thundered with hammer blows, but their legacy was a hush beneath it all. No poems were penned about their tongs, no bard sang of their forge. But every unbroken gate, every wheel that turned, every sword that stood its ground, was them. Villagers passed by, saw smoke, smelled sweat, and thought that was all. But within those walls a quiet symphony played, of heat, grit, and endurance. What they forged wasn't just metal, it was civilization. One rivet, one blade, one horseshoe at a time. And even after they were gone, the fire never truly faded. The son took the hammer. The grandson learned the heat. The name might disappear from memory, but the work, passed down hand to hand, carried on. They wore no crowns, they held no land. Yet without them, the carts wouldn't roll, the armies wouldn't march, the barns wouldn't stand. They were the base beneath the legends, the ember beneath the pages. And that mattered, even if it was never said aloud. Because in a world of stone, timber, and tenacity, they were the fire. Within the soil, in the gentle ritual of baking bread and fermenting beer, transformation was ever present. To the ancient Egyptians, it was not merely chemistry, it was divine dialogue. In their eyes, change was how the gods spoke. alchemy for them wasn't rooted in physical matter alone. It began as something inward. To alter a substance's outer form, one first had to grasp its essence. That spiritual foundation would ripple across centuries, leaving its mark on alchemical traditions from every corner of the world. There were stories, softly told over generations, that early Egyptian alchemists had been guided by a sacred being, Thoth, the ibis-headed deity of wisdom, moonlight, and mysticism. According to legend, it was Thoth who revealed the laws that shaped both creation and the soul's voyage beyond death. These revelations, they believed, were etched upon a fabled artifact, the Emerald Tablet. But before exploring that mystery, one quiet truth must be acknowledged. Alchemy began not as a lust for gold, but as a reverent science of life. In Egypt, it was considered the primordial fire, one that ignited all others. From distant Persia to medieval Paris, seekers would trace their steps back to that black, fertile land where transformation was born. If Egypt was the cradle of alchemy, then Thoth was its divine steward. In the mythos of that time, he wasn't just a deity. He embodied balance, time, knowledge, and the invisible laws of the universe. With an ibis beak and a crescent moon above him, he represented cosmic order in a world yearning for meaning. And to the Egyptians, alchemy wasn't just what he taught, it was what he was. Thousands of sacred writings were attributed to him, most lost to time or said to be too powerful for human eyes. But one surviving fragment, small yet potent, would ripple through the ages, the Emerald Tablet. Said to be carved into brilliant green stone, the tablet contained fewer than 15 lines of verse. And yet within those lines, many believed the secrets of reality, both material and spiritual, were encoded. Its most haunting phrase still lingers. That which is above is like that which is below, and that which is below is like that which is above. A reflection, they believed, between sky and soul, matter and mind. It didn't offer step-by-step methods for making gold. It offered a philosophy. That nothing is fixed. That all things, lead in thought, chaos and order, can be transmuted. The text spoke also of the one thing, the unseen source of all. Some imagined it as the philosopher's stone, others as the soul or a universal consciousness. But in truth, perhaps its greatest enigma was not what it said. But who could truly grasp it? For understanding wasn't for scholars alone. One had to seek. And so, even as Egypt's splendor dimmed, alchemy endured, carried gently across borders, shared by travelers, dreamers, and kings. Until at last it passed into the hands of another empire. Persia became the next keeper of the flame, though this was no simple transfer of wisdom. In Persian hands, alchemy evolved, melding the sacred fire of spirit with the thoughtful depth of philosophy. Much of this transformation was shaped by Zoroastrianism, among the oldest monotheistic faiths still remembered today. At its heart was the dance between opposites, light and shadow, purity and decay, truth and illusion. Within this worldview, fire stood not merely as a tool, but as the holiest of all elements. It burned constantly within temples, a living symbol of divine clarity. That same fire soon flickered beneath the crucibles of Persian alchemists. But even as Persia lit its own spiritual forge, it was a Greco-Egyptian mystic named Zosimos of Panopolis, who first gave alchemy a voice that still murmurs through history. Living in Roman Egypt during the 3rd or 4th century CE, Zosimos was no ordinary scholar. He wove together technical instructions, furnaces, stills, elixirs, with deeply symbolic visions. In one of his most haunting dreams, he found himself disassembled, burned, and reforged within an alchemical vessel. Yet this was no nightmare. To him it was sacred, a metaphor for inner peace. He believed the path of the alchemist wasn't just about reshaping metals, it was about reshaping oneself. Like copper refined into gold, the soul too had to be broken down, tempered, and elevated. Alchemy, he insisted, was a union of spirit and substance. Zosimos helped form the earliest framework for what would be known as spiritual alchemy, ideas centuries ahead of their time. His writings shimmered with symbols, lions devouring snakes, men dissolving into coloured smoke, beings of fire stepping from the crucible. These weren't formulas for gold, but allegories for the soul's transformation. And more importantly, he declared that true understanding could not be bought or recited, it had to be earned. The alchemist's journey was one of patience, pain, and illumination. Though many of his texts were scattered or forgotten, one truth remained. Alchemy had shifted. It was no longer a primitive science, it had become a sacred discipline. As the last embers of Egyptian, Greek, and Persian thought glowed quietly, a new light emerged, the Islamic Golden Age. While Europe slipped into darkness, places like Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba became bright havens for learning. mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and yes, alchemy. And standing at the heart of this intellectual spring was a man who would come to define it all. Jabir ibn Hayyan, known later in Europe as Geber. More than a chemist, more than a philosopher, Jabir was the bridge between matter and meaning. Working in the 8th century Abbasid court, he didn't treat alchemy as mere mysticism. He gave it structure, introducing distillation, crystallization, sublimation, tools still used today. He forged instruments, refined acids, and authored over 100 works that blended thoughtful reflection with precise, repeatable experiment. Though devoted to experimentation, they never strayed far from the spiritual heart of the craft. In truth, Jabir believed the universe itself was made from interwoven threads, earth, air, fire, and water, each laced with its own divine essence. His teachings embraced far more than furnaces and mixtures. They blended elements of numerology, celestial alignments, and symbolic meaning. To him, every change seen in the material world reflected a parallel shift within the soul. Jabir also gave alchemy a guiding principle, mizan, or balance. Just as physical health relies on harmony within the body, so too must metals be brought into alignment to reach their purest form. Gold, he taught, was not simply a valuable element, it represented matter in its most harmonious state, and through patient refinement, even the lowest metals could be lifted upward. His legacy extended far beyond the borders of the Islamic world. In time, Latin scholars translated Jabir's writings, and they quietly travelled across medieval Europe. Many Western alchemists building their own theories never fully realized their foundations rested on this Persian master's insight. Thanks to Jabir ibn Hayyan, alchemy stepped fully into structure. It was no longer only mystical, it had become a method, a system, a proto-science. Yet it never lost its sacred thread, always serving as a map for transformation, both earthly and spiritual. While the Islamic world preserved and expanded ancient wisdom, Europe still wandered through shadows, its worldview shaped by superstition and rigid orthodoxy. But knowledge has a gentle persistence. It slips past borders and binds curious minds. Bit by bit, alchemy found a path westward, carried in ink, in whispers, in conquest. The meeting place for this knowledge exchange included cities like Alexandria, once home to a legendary library, and later places like Toledo and Cordoba in Islamic Spain. Here, in rare pockets of peace, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars laboured side by side. They carefully translated Arabic texts, deciphering the ideas of Jabir, Zosimos, even Aristotle, and breathed ancient wisdom back into a Europe starved for learning. By the 12th century, this reawakening hit like lightning. Europe, long slumbering, stirred as alchemical texts arrived, not just offering technique, but an entire way of seeing the universe. In cloisters, strange scrolls were tucked among sacred pages. Monks, under candlelight, tested metals not only to alter their form, but to cleanse their own hearts. In those quiet rooms, the West fell under the spell of a single idea: transmutation. Could base metal become gold? Could the soul be refined in the same way? Among the most powerful works to cross the threshold was the Turba Philosophorum, a veiled conversation among wise men pondering nature's secrets. Soon after came the Picatrix, a vast Arabic grimoire brimming with celestial magic and hidden meanings. These weren't just manuals, they were messages, philosophical maps. Their Latin versions moved hand to hand, often dressed as religious commentaries, to avoid suspicion. Because alchemy, in its purest form, questioned order, and that made it dangerous. If lead might become gold, then perhaps a simple peasant could rise to nobility. Perhaps humanity itself could edge closer to the divine. The church watched with quiet caution, but the pull of alchemy was undeniable. It whispered of a hidden route to perfection, one untouched by doctrine or hierarchy. As the late Middle Ages arrived, Europe took hold of the ancient flame. What once glowed in Egyptian temples, Persian laboratories, and the courts of Baghdad now glimmered faintly within European monasteries, noble estates, and discreet brotherhoods. Alchemy had crossed a threshold, and it was on the cusp of changing once more. By then it had morphed into something near mythical. It wasn't merely a scholarly endeavour anymore, it had become a sacred undertaking. And at the centre of this pursuit sat a single object, a symbol, an obsession, the philosopher's stone. But this legendary stone was never simply a material compound. It was a symbol veiled in allegory, hidden behind layered symbols and cryptic verse. Said to transform common metals into radiant gold and offer eternal life through the elixir of immortality, the philosopher's stone captured the hopes of generations. Yet to those with deeper understanding, it was never meant to be literal. It represented a transformation of the soul. In old texts, it bore many names: lapis philosophorum, the red stone, the powder of projection. Some described it as a red crystal. Others insisted it was purely metaphorical, a sign of awakening. But all agreed on this: the stone embodied the potential for ultimate change. Many believed that the world was itself a living being, inching always toward harmony. Even metals were considered to be alive, maturing beneath the soil. Lead was simply gold that hadn't finished growing. And just as nature moved toward balance, so too could humankind, if only given the right catalyst. That catalyst, alchemists believed, was the philosopher's stone. Thinkers such as Albertus Magnus, Roger Bacon, and later Paracelsus devoted their lives to unraveling nature's mysteries in search of it. They studied the stars, experimented with minerals, and filled their writings with dragons, suns, kings, and serpents, each symbolizing steps in transformation. The path to the stone was called the magnum opus, the great work. It began with nigredo, blackening, the symbolic death of self. Then albedo, the whitening, a phase of purification. Next came citrinitas, the yellowing, enlightenment. And finally rubedo, redness, rebirth, and the arrival of the stone. Why cloak all this in symbols? Because true change, they believed, should only unfold for those ready in spirit as well as mind. The stone would not show itself to just anyone. It revealed itself only to the soul prepared. For some, this search was for gold. But the wisest sought something far more valuable: refinement of the soul. As the roots of alchemy deepened in medieval soil, its teachings slipped further from open light. What once thrived in temples and public discourse retreated into coded language and secret rituals. The Church, holding immense sway, viewed alchemy with both awe and suspicion. Some mystics welcomed it as a mirror of resurrection. Others feared its quiet claim that man might alter the natural order and ascend without divine permission. Branded heretical in the eyes of authority, alchemists began to shield their teachings in allegory and layered symbols. Thus unfolded an era where their craft receded into the shadows, nestled within secret fraternities, encrypted manuscripts, and obscure imagery that only the initiated could truly decipher. One such group, the Rosicrucians, emerged in the 17th century, cloaked in mystery. They claimed to preserve alchemical wisdom inherited from Egypt and Arabia. Though their existence remained unproven, their manifestos whispered of spiritual enlightenment, celestial harmony, and concealed sciences, ideas that spread swiftly, igniting curiosity in seekers across generations. Another society, the Freemasons, with origins tied to ancient builders of stone, carried rituals echoing the very heart of alchemical ideals. Whether or not they practiced the art in a literal sense, their ceremonies and symbols aligned remarkably with the pursuit of self-refinement and inner light, the essence of the great work. Meanwhile, alchemy survived through books of secrets. Some, like the Mutus Liber, spoke through imagery alone, communicating the sacred process of transformation without a single written word. Others adopted the green language, a cryptic form of wordplay, layered metaphors, double meanings, and poetic riddles, meant to shield their deeper truths from the unready. The alchemist's life became one of dual existence, outwardly a physician, scholar, or monk, obedient and reserved, inwardly a quiet rebel, seeking the divine through flame and ore, spirit and matter. Paradoxically, the same secrecy that once threatened the survival of alchemy also preserved it. Like embers sleeping beneath cooled ash, passed from master to apprentice, generation after generation. In those silent corners, alchemy endured, not only as a forerunner of science, but as a breathing philosophy. Yet on the horizon loomed its greatest test: the arrival of modern chemistry. By the 17th and 18th centuries, a quiet upheaval stirred. The Age of Enlightenment had begun. The poetic metaphors and mysticism once integral to alchemy were now viewed as outdated by the emerging scientific community. In their place came reason, evidence, and replicable outcomes. Alchemy's successor had stepped into the light, bearing a new name: chemistry. This shift didn't come as a sudden rupture, but as a slow evolution. Many early chemists had once been alchemists, their focus merely shifted. No longer seeking spiritual transfiguration, they now pursued measurable change. Gone were serpents and red suns, replaced with glassware, balances, and methodical notes. Robert Boyle, often considered the father of modern chemistry, delivered one of the final transitions in his 1661 work, The Skeptical Chemist. He proposed that matter consisted of fundamental particles, atoms, and that chemical change could be understood, without resorting to mysticism. Though he didn't ridicule alchemy, he insisted its principles must rest on natural law. Later, Antoine Lavoisier would reveal the role of oxygen in combustion, dismantling the old belief in 4 classical elements. With time, laboratories grew into secular temples of knowledge. The language of symbols faded, and alchemy, once sacred and secret, was slowly set aside, remembered not with shame, but with a quiet, fading reverence. It's a curious irony. Chemistry, the proud emblem of modern science, owes its very foundation to alchemy. The instruments they used, the experimental methods, even the burning curiosity, all emerged from the fires once tended by ancient hands. Alchemy had laid the path so chemistry might follow it further and faster. Yet as the world moved into a new era of industry, the needs shifted. Results took precedence over riddles. Laboratories earned support where lodges did not. The philosopher's stone quietly gave way to the microscope. The mystical Olympic was replaced with the practical Bunsen burner. What had once been holy became utilitarian. And still something remained. In quiet corners within thoughtful minds, alchemy never fully faded. It no longer stood as science, but as symbol, a reflection of transformation, of balance, of the timeless interplay between matter and meaning. While society turned toward chemistry to answer how, a few kept turning to alchemy to ask why. Because certain flames are not extinguished, they merely hide, glowing just beneath the surface. Though science no longer embraced it, alchemy didn't vanish. As it had always claimed, it changed. What began in Egypt's ancient tombs, refined in Persian temples, and encoded in Europe's medieval texts did not dissolve, it splintered. Into chemistry, into medicine, into depth psychology, and even into strands of modern spirituality. Its outer shell was shed, but its inward message endured. By the 20th century, a different kind of alchemist had emerged. Not with crucibles, but with journals. Not with metals, but with dreams. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, saw in alchemy a forgotten language of the soul. He believed the early alchemists weren't merely experimenting with matter. They were mapping the mind. The blackening, or nigredo, reflected despair. The whitening, or albedo, suggested clarity. The reddening, rubedo, signaled the birth of a whole and unified self. To Jung, the philosopher's stone represented individuation, the slow sacred process of becoming who one truly is. Even now, echoes of alchemy can be found in unexpected places, in the language of self-help, in tales of transformation, in metaphors of purifying, refining, distilling. The spirit lingers even in science. Today's chemists still transmute elements inside nuclear reactors. Physicists speak of dark matter and unified fields with the same awe once reserved for quintessence and ether. Perhaps, though, alchemy's deepest gift was its quiet insistence on unity. It refused to divide spirit from substance or inquiry from mystery. It suggested that to transform the world, one must first be transformed. That within every experiment lies a silent question: who are they becoming through the process? In a world racing toward precision, speed, and clarity, alchemy leaves behind a gentle reminder that real change, lasting change, begins not with force but with inner fire. And so the alchemist's flame still flickers, not in flasks but in those who listen closely, those who remember, those who are still transforming. Beneath the Turkish landscape, deep underfoot, lies a world long forgotten, a labyrinth of underground cities that stretch for miles. These were not crude shelters or makeshift caves. Instead, vast urban complexes had been carved into the earth, complete with homes, chapels, wells, storerooms, stables, and even schools. Some descended as far as 18 levels, housing thousands who once lived entirely in the cool shadows below. What makes it even more remarkable is that many of these places remained entirely undiscovered until the mid-20th century. In 1963, a man in the town of Derinkuyu was simply renovating his house. He knocked down a basement wall and, instead of bricks or soil, uncovered a tunnel. That passage led to another, then to a chamber, and eventually to a spiral staircase. Without meaning to, he had found the ancient gateway to one of the largest subterranean cities ever unearthed. It felt as though a whole civilization had quietly vanished beneath the surface, leaving behind only silence. But Derinkuyu wasn't alone. Over the decades, archaeologists uncovered hundreds of such settlements throughout Cappadocia. At least 40 of them major complexes, intricately connected by narrow corridors and secret passageways. These were not haphazard holes in the ground. They were carefully planned, purposefully built. Immense stone doors could be rolled into place from within to block off tunnels. Ventilation shafts allowed fresh air to travel downward. Deep wells tapped into aquifers, securing clean water even during long sieges. And yet one question lingers. Why would anyone go to such lengths to build entire cities beneath the earth? That mystery continues to stir the minds of historians. Theories abound. Perhaps these were places to hide from invading armies, or remote retreats for monastic orders, or secret spiritual havens. Some suggest they were older still, and stranger. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. Cappadocia was not just a region. It was a sanctuary, a second world hidden below the first, where entire communities could disappear into the quiet of the underground and continue their lives unseen. The deeper one descends into these buried cities, the more curious the story becomes. To truly understand why people built such places beneath Cappadocia, it helps to understand the landscape itself. This terrain is anything but ordinary. Millions of years ago, violent volcanic eruptions coated central Turkey in thick layers of ash. That ash eventually hardened into a porous, soft rock called tuff, a stone so light it could be carved with basic tools, yet durable enough to endure the centuries. Wind and rain sculpted the land into shapes that defied belief. Fairy chimneys, cone-like towers, spires resembling mushrooms. The entire region looked as though it had been pulled from a dream, or another world. But the ancients didn't merely admire the land's beauty, they worked with it. Early inhabitants realized this volcanic stone was a gift. It allowed them to carve out homes, sanctuaries, storage areas, even full communities, all without needing bricks or timber. Unlike structures on the surface, these stone-carved chambers stayed refreshingly cool in scorching summers, and comfortably warm in the bitter winter. Above ground, they shaped churches into cliff faces. But below, that's where something more profound began. What likely started as simple caves, a place to store food, to escape heat, or shelter from storms, slowly grew. As external threats mounted and communities expanded, so too did the chambers. They became rooms, then levels, then entire networks. And once the digging began, it never really stopped. Entire communities once vanished beneath the earth, carving ever deeper, not out of randomness, but with clear intention. Their tunnels didn't meander. They connected residences to kitchens, chapels to wells, stables to storage. Carefully crafted ventilation shafts extended all the way to the surface, circulating fresh air down through multiple layers. Vertical staircases were carved, just wide enough for humans and livestock to descend, yet narrow enough to protect against unwanted entry. What's truly astonishing is the possible age of these structures. While many of the underground cities expanded during the Byzantine era, some archaeologists suggest that the earliest layers, particularly in places like Derinkuyu and Kaymakli, may reach back as far as the Hittite Empire, or earlier, potentially around 2000 BCE. This land called for transformation, and the people of Cappadocia answered with patience, foresight, and a will to endure. The earth beneath their feet became more than soil. It became shelter, stronghold, and sky turned upside down, hiding stories in its silent walls. But what exactly were they concealing themselves from? That remains the lingering question, and the next chapter in this subterranean tale. Beneath the modest surface of the town of Derinkuyu rests something extraordinary. Not a city above ground, but a vast world hidden far below. In 1963, as a man carried out routine renovations in his home, he broke through a basement wall and revealed a shadowy tunnel. That narrow passage opened into chambers. The chambers led to corridors. Stairs curled deeper into the rock, passing from room to room, down and down again, until explorers stood 18 stories below the sunlit earth. They had stumbled upon Derinkuyu, the most expansive and deepest underground city ever unearthed in Cappadocia, and possibly the world. What archaeologists uncovered was breathtaking. This wasn't a temporary refuge, or a makeshift shelter in times of danger. Derinkuyu was a functioning city, carved entirely into volcanic stone. It contained homes, worship spaces, kitchens for communal meals, storage areas, wine and oil presses, classrooms, and even a chamber for baptisms. It's believed that up to 20,000 people, along with their animals and supplies, could have lived there. The design was nothing short of brilliant. Enormous rolling stone doors, shaped like giant millstones, were crafted to seal tunnels from within. They weren't just placed randomly, they were engineered to fit precisely, movable from the inside and nearly impenetrable from without. Air vents rose like veins through the rock, feeding oxygen to the lowest levels. Wells were dug deep to reach aquifers, allowing life underground without ever returning to the surface. There was even a mission school, complete with rooms for study, indicating that this wasn't only about survival. It was about continuing life, teaching, praying, gathering, growing. And yet Derinkuyu remains wrapped in mystery. historians still don't know exactly who constructed it first, or why. Some suggest that early Christians expanded it while fleeing persecution from Roman or Arab forces. Others believe its foundations are far more ancient, possibly built by the Phrygians or the Hittites, long before Christ was born. Why go to such extreme efforts to disappear below ground? Were they truly hiding from invaders, as many claim? Or was the danger not even human at all? Derinkuyu offers no inscriptions, no names, no confirmed chronology. Only rooms, only tunnels, only questions. And the deeper one ventures, the less it resembles a city, and the more it becomes a riddle, echoing silently beneath the stone. It begins to feel like something entirely different. Constructing downward is far more demanding than building up. There's no sunlight, no scaffolding, no open sky, only dense stone and shadow. Yet the builders of Cappadocia's underground cities didn't merely dig, they engineered, and they did so with astonishing clarity and care. These weren't haphazard tunnels scratched out in fear. They were tiered systems, shaped with purpose, each layer functioning as part of a larger whole. Living quarters were typically located closer to the surface, providing quicker access above ground when threats had passed. Below those came the essential layers: kitchens, workshops, food storage rooms, even areas for animals, cleverly spaced to reduce fire risks and keep waste isolated. The ventilation design was among their greatest triumphs. Long vertical shafts, some stretching over 50 meters, were chiseled through the rock to circulate air down through as many as 18 floors. Even without electricity or mechanical fans, air could flow naturally, gravity and geometry doing all the work. Water, of course, was vital. These underground havens were often anchored around natural aquifers. Wells dug deep into the stone ensured access to clean water even during prolonged sieges. In many cases, surface openings were sealed entirely to guard against sabotage. Communication routes also existed. Small hidden tunnels branched out toward auxiliary rooms, or even connected neighbouring cities. Messages and sometimes people could traverse these subterranean passages in complete secrecy. Defence systems, though deceptively simple, were remarkably effective. Tight corridors forced enemies to enter one by one. Trapdoors could drop without warning. Hidden exits offered routes into valleys or dry riverbeds. And most famously, those enormous rolling stone doors, shaped like millstones, that could be pushed into place to block a passage entirely. From one side, they looked like solid wall. From the other, they were a final barrier. Everything about these settlements suggests long-term survival, not for a week or two, but possibly months, or even longer. Which invites an unsettling question. What kind of threat could demand such elaborate preparation? And was it ever truly gone? Generations of historians have asked the same thing. Who, exactly, were the people of Cappadocia hiding from? What danger forced entire populations to disappear beneath their feet? The most conventional explanation is invasion. Central Anatolia, after all, has long been a corridor for conquest, from Assyrians to Persians, Romans to Byzantines. And later, in the early Islamic period, Arab incursions may have pushed Christian communities underground. Derinkuyu and Kaimakli could have become sanctuaries during these turbulent centuries, offering safety in stone, while battles raged above. But even this theory falls short. The sheer complexity of the cities, the depth, the infrastructure, suggests a project that wasn't born out of panic. It was a strategy, a vision, one that took not months but generations. Some of the deepest layers seem to have been carved long before Christianity. Some scholars trace the earliest sections to the Hittite Empire, nearly 4,000 years ago. Others suggest the Phrygians continued the work. Beyond those names, the trail fades. There are no carvings, no dates, no clear record of who vanished underground, or why. And so speculation remains. There are those who believe these cities were built not merely to evade human threats. These underground cities may have been constructed in response to something altogether different: natural catastrophes, solar phenomena, or even ancient warfare that left the skies seared and the earth tainted. Some of the more speculative ideas go further still, proposing that the reason for such careful concealment was to escape beings not of this world, entities described in mythologies from many cultures: sky deities, watchers, destroyers. While these theories remain on the fringe, there's an unsettling logic to them. The concealed air shafts, the hidden exits, the massive stone doors. Every element seems designed not just to shield but to vanish entirely, as if what they dreaded didn't merely strike, it pursued. These interpretations, however speculative, underscore the central enigma that persists. No matter how many chambers are uncovered, the most important question remains veiled. Who were they hiding from, and did their efforts succeed? For when one delves deep into the earth, it's not just stone that's revealed, but darkness, mystery, and silence. Imagine for a moment what it was like to live not merely a day, but long months, perhaps years, completely beneath the surface. No daylight, no open skies, only stone walls, the flicker of oil lamps, and the muffled hum of a hidden world. For thousands in Cappadocia, this was not a fleeting moment, but a chapter of existence during times of unrest. Yet these underground spaces were far from lifeless. They pulsed with daily rhythms and were thoughtfully arranged to support entire communities. Families occupied suites of interconnected rooms. Kitchens, usually located on lower levels to better vent smoke, became centres of warmth and sustenance. Meals were prepared in clay ovens, their aromas of baked bread mingling with the earthy scent of stone and the faint musk of livestock. Sacred spaces also existed, chapels carved into rock walls, some bearing crosses and altars, others adorned with faded frescoes. Worship, ritual, and faith continued, uninterrupted by the stone above. These settlements featured communal gathering areas, classrooms for children, and corridors that resonated softly with movement and conversation. Illumination came from oil lamps, countless small flames lining the paths. Ingeniously placed shafts doubled as chimneys and ventilation ducts, channeling smoke and allowing the breath of the surface to reach far below. Nevertheless, life here was far from easy. Oxygen was a precious commodity, darkness reigned. And when quiet settled, it was a silence so complete it could weigh upon the spirit. Water was drawn from wells reaching deep into subterranean aquifers. Grain was stored in airtight granaries, carefully guarded against rot. Even wine and olive oil were pressed underground, signs that life here, though hidden, retained taste, texture, and tradition. These cities weren't last-minute shelters. They were deliberately crafted worlds meant to endure. Livestock, goats, chickens, sheep, were kept in designated stalls near the upper levels, where air circulated more freely. Their presence wasn't just practical, it was strategic. They offered warmth and sustenance. The ancient architects understood not just engineering, but human resilience. Living quarters balanced privacy with collective life. Families had their own spaces, shared areas fostered connection. Life underground was shaped not by desperation, but by care. It wasn't merely about hiding, it was about continuing, about culture, about survival. One can't help but be humbled by the thought. As conflicts surged above, life persisted below. Couples married, parents raised children. The departed were mourned, remembered. All of it, beneath layers of rock, lit by flickering flame. To live in such a place wasn't to surrender to fear. It was to respond with resolve. The cities of Cappadocia weren't isolated holes in the earth. They were threads in a vast woven network beneath volcanic hills and hidden valleys, a concealed world built to last. Chambers and concealed passageways appear to interconnect numerous underground cities, suggesting that Derinkuyu, Kaymaklı, Özkonak, and others may not have existed as isolated enclaves, but as components of a broader subterranean network. Some of these tunnels extend for kilometers, threading beneath the landscape like veins under skin, narrow, serpentine, and scarcely broader than a person's shoulders. These passages likely facilitated covert travel, the relay of messages and transport of provisions between distinct complexes. Derinkuyu and Kaymaklı, two of the most expansive cities, are thought to be connected by a passage nearly 9 kilometers in length. Such a feat points not only to advanced engineering, but also to a level of collective organization rarely seen in ancient architecture. If these connections truly existed, they would imply a mutual support system among underground communities, enabling them to endure sieges or other crises like a hidden federation beneath the surface. Yet these tunnels weren't solely practical, they were strategic. Designed with narrow entries, sharp turns, and constricted corridors, they funneled intruders into single-file lines, making defense and ambush more manageable. Trapdoors and stone plugs were crafted to be quickly deployed, blocking passageways and impeding enemies. Despite modern efforts, the full scope of these tunnels remains elusive. In 2014, a more expansive complex was discovered unexpectedly beneath Nevşehir, possibly surpassing even Derinkuyu in scale. Archaeologists estimate this newer site may contain scores of levels, water channels, religious chambers, and uncharted passageways still waiting to be mapped. What role did these tunnels truly serve? Were they escape routes alone, or the foundation of a civilization deliberately designed to remain unseen? Each discovery reshapes the understanding of Cappadocia's subterranean world, not merely as individual shelters, but as a unified and ancient infrastructure. Perhaps entire cities lie beneath us, purposefully hidden rather than lost to time. In this region, the Earth doesn't just conceal secrets, it safeguards them. Even after decades of research and excavation, the underground realms of Cappadocia retain their mystery. The stone halls may be still, yet questions persist with growing intensity, not only about the methods used to construct these marvels, but the motivations behind them. Where scholarly consensus trails off, speculation and mythology rush in. One enduring puzzle concerns the actual age of these cities. Traditional archaeology attributes their expansion to the Byzantine period, particularly as Christians fled invading forces. However, some scholars contend that the earliest segments, those deepest and most rudimentary, predate recorded history, perhaps dating back 4 millennia or more. If so, what crisis existed in antiquity dire enough to drive people underground? Theories abound. Some propose these cities were contingency shelters for environmental catastrophes, colossal floods, solar storms, volcanic winters, or ancient shifts in climate. The city's hidden, self-sustaining, and sealable designs suggest that they might have functioned as survival bunkers for enduring prolonged disaster. Others speculate beyond natural causes. Ancient astronaut theorists argue that early societies may have constructed these sanctuaries to escape celestial visitors, figures described in legend as sky beings, watchers, or deities who descended from the heavens. Some believe the underground cities were constructed not to evade fellow humans, but rather to escape something entirely different. Natural catastrophes, celestial disturbances, or even ancient wars that left the skies marked and the land tainted. These ideas have all been proposed. There are too, the more speculative beliefs that suggest these spaces were meant to hide from beings beyond this world, entities referenced in myths across cultures. Sky deities, watchers, destroyers. Such notions gain appeal when one considers the intentional concealment, camouflaged air shafts, hidden exits, and stone doors. It feels at times as if their architects weren't merely avoiding conflict. They were attempting to vanish entirely, as though they feared a presence that pursued rather than attacked. While these concepts remain in the realm of theory, they circle a deeper mystery. Despite layers of discovery, one question lingers. Who were they hiding from, and did it succeed? For the deeper one explores, the more the shadows seem to thicken. Consider the weight of a life not just spent, but endured, for weeks, even years, beneath the ground. Without the touch of sun or the breath of sky, surrounded only by stone, oil-lit chambers, and the gentle hush of subterranean existence. This was daily life in Cappadocia for many during periods of danger. Yet these underground communities weren't devoid of vitality. They carried on with quiet rhythm, structured routines that sustained the whole. Families occupied suites of carved-out rooms. Communal cooking was done on lower levels, where smoke could drift more safely. Meals were prepared in earthen ovens. The scent of baked loaves mingled with the earthy aroma of livestock and stone. Places of worship were present too. Chapels etched with crosses and altars, some adorned with painted frescoes. In these spaces, worship and ritual continued. Schools operated, children gathered, voices moved through corridors. Illumination came from oil lamps lining the walls, and smoke followed upward through cleverly designed vents. Still, such a life was far from simple. Oxygen was limited, darkness was constant. Silence, when it fell, became absolute. Water was drawn from deeply tapped wells. Grain was sealed in cool storage rooms. Even underground, wine and oil were pressed, signs that comfort and culture remained important. These cities weren't makeshift shelters, they were designed to last. Livestock, goats, sheep, poultry, were kept near entrances for easier handling and warmth. Their arrangement wasn't arbitrary. The layout respected human needs. Rooms provided privacy. Shared areas maintained community. Existence below wasn't driven by panic. It was guided by resilience. These settlements weren't merely safe havens. They safeguarded entire ways of life. Beneath the turbulence of history, people continued. Marriages were celebrated. Children were taught. The dead were mourned, all under rock, in flame-lit silence. To dwell underground wasn't to cower. It was to adapt, to resist, to endure. Cappadocia's hidden cities weren't isolated efforts. They were woven into a broader network of survival. Beneath its hills and valleys stretched a system of tunnels, wide, narrow, silent, linking communities like arteries beneath skin. Cities such as Derinkuyu, Kaymaklı, Özkonak, and others may not have stood alone but formed parts of a united world beneath the surface. Tunnels extended for kilometers, some barely shoulder-wide, used to carry messages, transport goods, or flee in secret. One passage possibly stretches 9 kilometers, linking 2 of the largest cities. This wasn't just architectural brilliance, it was organized strategy, an underground confederation in stone. Even defense was part of the design. Narrow choke points, blind corridors, cleverly disguised exits. These turned pursuit into disadvantage. Some tunnels were rigged with traps, sealed with heavy stones rolled silently into place. Yet much remains hidden. In 2014, under the town of Nevşehir, archaeologists stumbled upon what may be an even larger complex, possibly eclipsing Derinkuyu itself. Temples, aqueducts, and layers of tunnels yet to be mapped, each whispering of lives once lived in quiet defiance. Were these escape routes, or an infrastructure crafted to exist unseen? The deeper the dig, the clearer it becomes. Cappadocia's story lies not only in walls but in connections, in systems carved with patience. Whole cities buried not by accident but by intention. Here, the ground doesn't just cover, it guards. Though explored for decades, these underground cities resist clarity. The stone remains still. Yet the mystery grows louder. When were they built? Why? History can only say so much. The rest, the parts that don't align with timelines or expected patterns, fall to speculation. Some theories suggest shelters from disasters, floods, volcanic winters, cosmic flares. Others look higher, proposing that early peoples built these spaces not for storms, but for beings they feared from the stars. Perhaps the cities were symbolic as much as practical. In some ancient beliefs, descending beneath the earth represented death and renewal, a sacred transformation. Were these halls for spiritual rebirth? Or were they concealed deliberately, never meant to be unearthed? There's no single explanation. The breadth, the craftsmanship, the age, they don't quite fit. And that may be the most mysterious part of all, because sometimes what lies beneath is not history, but a frontier never meant to be crossed. Today, travelers wander dreamlike terrain, orange-tinged peaks, valleys painted by wind, hot air balloons drifting in dawn light. But beneath their steps, the earth remains hollow. There lies a shadowed world carved in patience, still waiting. Visitors can now enter parts of it, descending stone stairs, passing through archways, stepping into rooms once filled with hushed resilience. Yet so much remains untouched: sealed doorways, collapsed passages, tunnels that fade into black. These are not just archaeological ruins, they are stories in stone, proof of what people will do, not just to live, but to remain. They protected their children, they guarded their wisdom, they chose to disappear. And in doing so, left behind a message, not in script but in structure. We do not know their names, we cannot speak their languages, but we walk their halls. And in doing so, we understand they were thinkers, planners, and survivors. They left behind something enduring, not for discovery perhaps, but for remembrance. Cappadocia teaches us that not all truth lies in plain sight. Some is buried, shielded by design, secrets held by the earth itself. And what endures? Mystery. In the fit of a hidden door, in the quiet breath of an ancient shaft, in the darkness that still waits behind unmapped walls. Perhaps, after all, the purpose was never to be known. But even now, as they move quietly through those halls, with layers of earth above and silence pressing in, some feel the echo of something old. Not fear, but resolve. For when the world above turned wild, the people of Cappadocia turned inward, and the land in turn kept their memory safe. To those long ago, sleep was no retreat, it was a passage. And dreams were not escapes, they were journeys inward. They weren't dismissed as mere illusions or fragments of fantasy. Instead, they were regarded with solemnity. Dreams were messages, sometimes omens, sometimes divine prophecies, and often seen as direct communications from deities or unseen spirits. For ancient civilizations, the line separating the tangible and the mystical was not firm, it was permeable. And during slumber, that line blurred. To them, dreaming held a sacred, often chilling significance. It was in those silent, unguarded hours that the sacred could reach into human consciousness. What was uttered, whether in hushed tones or thunderous roars, could steer a ruler's command, alter a sacred rite, or even shape the destiny of an entire city. From Mesopotamia's floodplains to Egypt's sanctuaries and the philosophical corners of ancient Greece, dreams were placed upon a sacred pedestal. The people believed they were being visited not by whimsical fantasies, but by tangible forces wielding real power. Such dreams might predict war, expose treachery, bring healing, or demand offerings. To dismiss one was not just folly, it was perilous. In that sense, the dreamer was never just a sleeper. They became a conduit, a temporary vessel for divine insight. In exceptional cases, they emerged as prophets, chosen to receive the gods' messages. Entire roles were dedicated to understanding the language of dreams. Priests, shamans, oracles, and seers trained to decode the riddles of night. A serpent in a vision might symbolize renewal or signal destruction. A rising sun could mean triumph or deceit. Each civilization carried its own dream lexicon, but the consensus remained: dreams were never meaningless. Even now, echoes of that belief linger. People still speak of following their dreams or having an awakening, phrases rooted in a time when dreaming was less metaphor and more map. In those ancient minds, dreams were blueprints, warnings, divine signals whispered when the waking self was at rest. This era existed long before Freud, before sleep cycles were charted or science sought to analyze the mechanics of the mind. In that older worldview, dreams were not just psychological echoes, they were journeys, sacred paths walked beside the divine. The earliest society to leave behind written accounts of dreams were the Sumerians, who flourished in Mesopotamia over 5 millennia ago. They viewed dreams not as disjointed thoughts, but as sacred transmissions from the gods, complex, layered, and consequential. In the ruins of their cities, archaeologists have uncovered clay tablets bearing dreams, some deeply personal, others entangled with the affairs of kings. Among the Sumerians, dream interpretation wasn't a parlor trick. It was a respected discipline. Kings appointed court dream interpreters, specialists trained to unravel divine codes. Their insights could change the trajectory of empires. A remarkable example of this reverence appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the most ancient literary works ever recorded. Within its verses, Gilgamesh and Enkidu experience profound and cryptic dreams as they prepare for their perilous mission to confront the monstrous Humbaba. Gilgamesh envisions cosmic battles and crumbling mountains, images that his mother and temple priests decipher as layered messages from the divine. These were not overlooked, they were honoured as sacred counsel. According to the Sumerians, there were 2 distinct classes of dreams, those bestowed by the gods to help or instruct, and others that were empty, simply echoes of the day. Determining which was which required the insight of a priest or diviner, individuals trained to recognize omens, symbols, and patterns hidden in the fabric of sleep. Within temples, special chambers were often designated where kings or priests would rest, hoping to receive visions sent from the divine. This sacred practice, later known in other cultures as incubation, may have had its earliest roots with the Sumerians. These dreams were regarded as oracles, at times even more reliable than signs seen in waking life. Dreams could also serve political aims. When a ruler proclaimed that gods had spoken to him in sleep, it wasn't only spiritual authority he claimed, it was justification for power. In Sumerian thought, the cosmos pulsed with meaning, and dreams in turn became its voice. Each image, a storm, a lion, a falling star, was laden with symbolic force. In a world where gods were believed to walk among mortals, to dream was to listen. To disregard those dreams risked provoking the displeasure of the heavens themselves. For the ancient Egyptians, dreams weren't mere messages. They were doorways, channels to divine realms, peeks into the afterlife, and at times instructions for the living. In a society so entwined with death and eternity, sleep served not only as rest, but as a gentle rehearsal for the final journey. And the visions that arrived at night, these were voices from beyond. Egyptian writings reveal that dreams were understood as both intensely personal and powerfully prophetic. Much like their Sumerian counterparts, Egyptians sorted dreams into 2 broad categories: those of truth, gifts from the gods or ancestral spirits to warn, heal, or enlighten, and false dreams shaped by the disorder of the body or confusion of the mind. Temples devoted to deities such as Serapis or Thoth hosted dream incubation rituals. Worshippers would sleep within temple sanctuaries, their dreams interpreted the next morning by priests. Some dreams were etched into walls, preserved in inscriptions, remembered for their divine guidance. Healing was believed to come this way too, brought not by medicine, but by a message whispered while one slept. Among the most compelling remnants of this culture is the so-called Ramses Dream Book, dating back to approximately 1300 BCE. This papyrus scroll catalogues over 100 dreams, each paired with an interpretation. One entry suggests that if a man dreams of eating crocodile flesh, it portends dominance over his enemies. Another warns that drinking warm beer in a dream signals sorrow ahead. Such meanings were taken with the utmost seriousness. Pharaohs, generals, priests all turned to dream readers to interpret these nocturnal visions, acting as liaisons between the divine and the dreaming. In Egyptian belief, the K, the vital essence or soul, was said to drift from the body during sleep, journeying into hidden worlds. What it witnessed returned in dream form. These visions might include reunions with the deceased, encounters with gods, or even omens wrapped in strange symbols. Not all dreams were benign. Protective spells were sometimes recited to guard against nightmares or malevolent entities. Even the inscriptions found in royal tombs speak of dream visitations, narratives where kings received divine instruction at night, solidifying their place in the eternal order. In this land of deities and pyramids, dreams were not fantasy. They were sacred truths from beyond. Revelations arrived, and to dream was to momentarily step into the eternal. In ancient Greece, dreams occupied a unique space, bridging medicine, mythology, and philosophy. To them, dreams weren't merely personal experiences. They were cosmic messages sent by gods, legendary heroes, or even forces from the underworld. Yet unlike earlier cultures, the Greeks also began to wonder why dreams occurred, planting the early seeds of psychological inquiry. Among the most sacred places for dream revelations in Greece was the Asclepion, a healing sanctuary dedicated to the god Asclepios, the divine healer. Pilgrims travelled from all over the Mediterranean seeking to sleep within these temple grounds, engaging in a process known as incubation. Before they lay down to dream, they would cleanse their bodies through bathing, fast, offer prayers, and sometimes sacrifices, rituals intended to prepare both body and spirit for divine messages. Within the dreams that followed, Asclepios himself was said to appear, diagnosing ailments, prescribing cures, or even performing symbolic dream surgeries. The priests of the temple, known as therapeutae, would then interpret these visions and apply treatments based on what had been revealed by the gods. This integration of mysticism and medicine was held in great esteem. The walls of the Asclepions were inscribed with testimonies, thankful inscriptions from the healed, praising divine intervention. Yet dreams in Greece weren't limited to healing. They also served political and prophetic roles. In the epic poetry of Homer, dreams were instruments of divine influence. Zeus, in the Iliad, sends a deceptive vision to Agamemnon to sway a battle decision. In the Odyssey, Penelope speaks of two gates, one made of horn, from which true dreams flow, and one of ivory, from which come falsehoods. Dream interpretation grew into a recognized discipline. Philosophers such as Aristotle and Heraclitus pondered dreams' origins, debating whether they stemmed from divine influence or the movements of the soul. Meanwhile, Artemidorus of Daldis, a 2nd century interpreter, composed the Oneirocritica, a comprehensive 5-volume text instructing how to interpret dreams based on one's gender, profession, social status, and symbolic associations. His writings would be cited for centuries. To the Greeks, sleep allowed the soul to drift gently from the body into a liminal state, where it could access deeper realities. Whether arising from the divine or from introspective thought, dreams held meaning. To them, dreaming wasn't simply a vision, it was a fleeting union with the divine intellect. In the ancient world, dreams weren't considered mere reflections of thought. They were often seen as prophecies. Many civilizations believed that the dream realm dissolved the barrier of time, permitting the future to leak into the present. To witness a dream could be to glimpse fate before it manifested, and that foresight came with both power and burden. Across Sumer, Egypt, and Greece, history recounts kings, generals, and prophets whose decisions hinged upon dreams. One mistaken interpretation could doom a nation. One accurate insight might shift the course of history. In Mesopotamia, dreams filled with celestial omens, falling stars, blackened suns, rivers of blood, were believed to signal calamities. Priests maintained meticulous records of these symbols, studying them for patterns that might reveal an empire's destiny. These archives weren't passive. They were actively consulted in times of unrest. Likewise, the Egyptians regarded dreams as urgent warnings from the divine. Pharaoh Thutmose IV famously declared that his ascension to the throne had been foretold in such a vision. Dreams, as recounted in ancient lore, were not dismissed as idle imagination, but embraced as channels of revelation. For Thutmose IV, a vision in which the Sphinx spoke and promised kingship, if he cleared the sand from its form, served not only as guidance but as a legitimizing tale. Regardless of its truth, the people believed. In Greek lands, prophetic dreams made their mark upon both the battlefield and the Senate floor. Leaders, before rendering decisions, sought omens, sometimes through ritualized dreaming or through oracles at Delphi, who themselves often received guidance through dreams. Even Alexander the Great was said to have dreamt of the Egyptian god Serapis before his Persian campaign. He interpreted this as a blessing. Yet divine visions were not reserved solely for the powerful. Ordinary folk too believed dreams held insight into marriage, birth, sickness, or death. Artemidorus's Onera Critica compiled thousands of such interpretations. Losing teeth could herald a family member's death. Flying might signal an unexpected twist in fate. For many, dreams served as a quiet window into the divine, a glimpse of destiny's fabric. But this connection bred anxiety as well. What if the warning was missed, or worse, misread? In cultures where deities spoke through slumber, drifting off was never merely rest. It was an exchange with fate itself. Healing too was found in dream states. Rather than herbs or knives, many turned to sacred dream temples for recovery. These sanctuaries, spread across ancient civilizations, began treatment with sleep. The Asclepians of ancient Greece, devoted to Asclepios, the god of healing, are perhaps best known. But the practice reached deeper. Earlier civilizations in Egypt and Mesopotamia also believed healing dreams could bring clarity and restoration. These temples were not escape routes from pain. They were thresholds into sacred realms. The ritual of incubation began with purification, fasting, bathing, even sacrifice. Then, at night, the pilgrim lay in a sanctified space, open to divine contact. Within these visions, spirits and deities offered cures, touched ailing bodies with celestial hands, or coiled as serpents, symbols of healing. Upon waking, temple priests, versed in decoding such dreams, would interpret the messages. They might recommend drinking a special concoction, undertaking a symbolic walk, or making a sacred offering. In some instances, the dream itself was the cure. These sites weren't isolated novelties. They were visited by thousands. Temple inscriptions spoke of sight restored, fever abated, pain vanished. Whether the results were physical, psychological, or spiritual, the impact was real. This practice transcended cultures. In Egypt, temples to Serapis or Imhotep served similar purposes. In Mesopotamia, Gula's temples, the goddess of healing, welcomed dreamers into ritual rest. What bound all these places was a shared faith, that the body, the soul, and the dream were intricately entwined. In ancient thought, body and soul were deeply intertwined, and it was believed the soul spoke most clearly through dreams. Healing extended beyond the physical. It was a matter of achieving harmony between the mortal and the divine. Within these sanctuaries of stillness, dreams weren't dismissed as mere nighttime stories. They were considered potent medicine. To many ancient cultures, the dream realm served not only as a place for prophecy or healing, but also as a threshold through which the dead might speak. It was widely believed that, in sleep, the veil separating the living from the deceased grew thin. When individuals dreamed of departed loved ones, it wasn't regarded as mere longing or grief. Rather, such visions were often interpreted as real visitations, messages, warnings, or requests left unfulfilled. In Egypt, where beliefs surrounding the afterlife were woven deeply into daily life, dreams were thought to offer a direct bridge to the underworld. The soul, or Ka, was believed to wander freely during slumber, sometimes even journeying to meet the dead. If a deceased relative appeared within a dream, it might signal displeasure, a need for offerings, or simply a desire to offer guidance. Egyptians sometimes wrote letters to the dead, placing them in tombs or temples, asking for help or protection, hoping the spirit would reply within a dream. In Mesopotamian belief, dreams involving the dead were approached with a mixture of respect and caution. The deceased were seen as possessing lingering power, and a nocturnal encounter could suggest an unresolved matter, perhaps a neglected rite or an unfulfilled promise. To restore balance, rituals of cleansing or offerings were often performed. The Greeks too regarded dreams of the dead with gravity. In Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus descends into the realm of the dead and converses with fallen souls, a vision that echoed what many believed could unfold during dreams. Heraclitus, the philosopher, once reflected, "The waking share one common world, but the sleeping retreat into their own." Within that private terrain, the departed could find their way back. And even outside the Mediterranean, in distant cultures across continents, the idea endured. The dead were not truly gone, and dreams were the language through which they might still speak. When a lost parent or child whispered in the night, ancient peoples didn't consider it symbolic. They believed it to be real. Sleep wasn't a realm for forgetting. It was a space where the past might reach out, longing not to be lost. To ancient minds, dreams weren't simple messages. They were intricate puzzles, rich with meaning, symbols, strange creatures, impossible happenings, and signs from the stars. Such dreams were believed to carry divine code. Interpreting them wasn't a task taken lightly. It demanded intuition, formal training, and often ritual. In places like Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece, professional dream interpreters functioned almost like clergy or mystics. They pored over volumes of dream texts, memorized symbolic associations, and were adept at distinguishing a sacred dream from a meaningless one. Their insights could sway decisions in governance, health, and even war. Across civilizations, certain dream symbols recurred again and again, but rarely with a single fixed meaning. A snake might represent peril in one context, while in another it could suggest change. Fire could warn of destruction or herald purification. Flying might signify the soul's longing to transcend, or reflect a wish to escape from waking constraints. Egyptian dream books contained detailed catalogues, interpreting dreams of drowning as signs of emotional turbulence. Dreams of blindness might suggest a looming spiritual awakening, or a hard truth coming into focus. These interpretations weren't casual guesses. They formed a refined symbolic language, shaped and sharpened across generations. In Greece, the scholar Artemidorus of Daldis built upon this foundation. Daldis compiled the Oneirocritica, a 5-volume manual dedicated to the analysis of dreams. He emphasized that dream interpretation wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach. Context shaped meaning. A flood seen by a farmer conveyed something entirely different than when envisioned by a sailor. The Oneirocritica stands as one of the earliest texts to suggest that personal experiences influence the nature of dreams, a surprisingly forward-thinking notion for the 2nd century. Dream interpretation, too, was often interwoven with divination. Dreams were not isolated phenomena, but part of a larger tapestry of omens, signs, and sacred messages. Those who dreamt might consult oracles, cast lots, or make ritual offerings to gain clarity about what they had seen. Some even maintained dream journals, etched onto papyrus or clay, not solely for personal reflection, but to be shared within their communities. For ancient people, symbols were not simply unconscious imagery. They served as keys, fragments of a divine lexicon whispered into their sleep. Deciphering that hidden language could unlock divine will, alter destinies, or illuminate inner truths. To those civilizations, a dream wasn't merely a fleeting tale. It was a celestial message wrapped in metaphor. In modern times, people often dismiss dreams as hazy impressions, odd images quickly fading with the morning light. At best, they serve as material for therapists or creative projects. Yet for the ancients, dreams held far greater weight. They were structured, sacred, and woven deeply into the fabric of daily life. They provided healing, guidance, communion with departed souls, and moments of connection to the divine. Dreams were not separate from waking life. They were threads stitched into medicine, belief, and power. So, what changed? As science and rationalism flourished, particularly after the Enlightenment, dreams were stripped of their sanctity. Once regarded as divine communiques, they became categorized as neurological phenomena, random firings of the brain, fragments of memory, or emotional overflow. What had once been sacred was now clinical. Symbolism gave way to chemical explanations. Still, even in today's world, people instinctively turn to dreams during loss, transition, or uncertainty. A dream of a departed loved one might offer peace. A recurring nightmare may reveal hidden stress or an unspoken fear. Modern psychology, led by figures like Freud and Jung, sought to reclaim aspects of this ancient perspective. They acknowledged that dreams possess a form of wisdom, even if its source was redefined. The ancients, however, already understood this. Dreams were never separate from reality. They served as reflective pools, mirroring not just emotions and memories, but vast eternal truths. Whether it was a deity offering insight, a storm foreseen through symbols, or a whisper from a parent long past, dreams offered something that daylight could not. A quiet dialogue with the unknown. And perhaps in today's world, what has been lost is the willingness to listen. Across centuries and civilizations, one belief endured. Dreams are not chance. They are doorways. The question isn't whether they are real, it's whether there remains the courage to step through. Etched into every ancient temple, scroll, and clay tablet, a message continues to echo. Pay attention. Close your eyes. Not to escape, but to understand. For within the hush of the night, when all else fades, we may finally hear what the Sumerians, Egyptians, and Greeks once heard so clearly, that dreams are not echoes of thought. They are the voice of the soul,